Welcome to another episode of Chad's Chat. Join Chad Chilius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everyone. Today's podcast is sponsored by the North Idaho College and the upcoming Accessibility Camp Coeur d'Alene, which is on August 3rd and 4th in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. More information on the Alley Camp Symposium can be found at nic.edu/A11Y camp. So we thank them for being our sponsor for today's podcast. My name is Chad Chilius. I'm an Adobe certified instructor, as well as Director of Training Solutions and Principal at Chax Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I am Director of Media Productions at Chax Training and Consulting, and Chad and I are both accessible document specialists certified by the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And if you want your certification, head on over to accessibilityassociation.org and our good friends over at IAAP. They are a great organization, and we highly recommend you hooking up and being a member of that group. Lots of great things to learn. Chad, how you doing today?
Doing pretty good. We're wrapping up another week and, wrapping up some projects, and everything's going really well.
Awesome. We are in full swing with cucumbers. We have cucumbers coming out of our ears. My kimchi is in full swing. It's tasting great. It's 3 weeks old now. So for those of you who know, the older kimchi is, the better it is. And we're getting ready to use all of our cucumbers to make some other kinds of kimchi. So it's pretty exciting. So
very interesting.
Awesome. Well, Chad, today we have a very special guest. Normally we talk about tech, and then we'll have a guest on. And, I typically will troll the Twitter or Facebook or somewhere, LinkedIn, and find a podcast guest. But Heather is someone interesting. So I met her at Access U, and actually a little bit before Access U. And our guest is Heather Neff. And Heather, why don't you introduce yourself? So welcome to our podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Tell our audience a little bit about you.
Thanks. I'm honored to be here today. So a little bit about me. I am a graphic designer, marketing director, creative director that I've been doing this for over 20 years. And then I became disabled. So it became a whole thing about trying to figure out assistive technology to help me. I tore a ligament in my arm, so mousing became super painful. I have a lot of chronic pain. So I started seeking out different assistive technologies, which led me into the whole world of accessibility, which is, of course, as you know, a rabbit hole of endless information. So
yes, that is true.
As a designer, it was a big deal about trying to figure out what to do. So that's how I got into all of this. And I am actually running a company I founded called Equivalent Design. And we are an accessible graphic design firm, and we specialize in creating and coding accessible SVGs.
Awesome. So SVG. So I know, pretty much in the graphic design world, people are used to using, JPEGs and PNGs and TIFFs and EPS. I'm not sure that there are a lot of people out there who are familiar with some of the benefits of the SVG format. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So the Scalable Vector Graphic, or the SVG, is actually made out of XML, which is extensive markup language. And the way that most of us have seen it is that in Adobe Illustrator, as you export your graphic, there's a way to actually get the SVG code. And the code is again XML, and you can grab that code when you're exporting from Illustrator. And then you can actually take that into a editing program and start taking out the crap that Illustrator puts in there, and actually start they put a bunch of stuff that just comes in that doesn't need to be there. And then also the way that you export stuff is really important, but we can actually get in there and add a bunch of accessible code, ARIA stuff inside of it, and really start customizing it to respond to media queries and to do different things for screen sizes, to respond to different screen sizes. And there's so much we can do, including having invented some new ways of coding things to even respond to force colors. So we've been up to coding new things to create these scalable vector graphics into the ultimate accessible graphic.
Yeah, so like for the designers, for the listeners out there who are designers, right? And especially print designers, right? I mean, in the print world, we've always kind of separated our graphics into two different camps, right? You have pixel or raster-based graphics, typically ones that come from Photoshop, and then you also have vector-based graphics, and they are typically graphics that come from Illustrator. And the beauty of vector graphics is there is no resolution, right? They are literally infinitely scalable. And I know for me, I always say vector is king, because when you've got vector, you can do with it whatever you want. No degradation, no loss of quality. And traditionally on the web, we have, and Heather, correct me if I'm wrong, but traditionally on the web, we have been relegated to using pixel-based graphics, right? The web graphics we typically are using, we go back a ways, is JPEG, right? Mm-hmm. And then Ping is a little bit newer than JPEG, but they're still both pixel-based graphics. So at a certain point, you try to scale them up too high or make them too big, and you see that degradation in quality. Absolutely. SVG for the web is what, the SVG is a vector graphic, right? Mm-hmm. And, Heather, there's been a bunch of sites I've been seeing that offer like a high contrast mode, mm-hmm. where you can, click a button or click an element on the page, and it'll switch the website over into high contrast mode. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And
yeah, actually,
how go ahead.
This topic is so complicated because it does back all the way up to actually offering the WCAG compliancy of 1.4.8, which allows the user to surf the internet in the way that they want to, i.e. like dark mode or in force colors. So before you actually get into these vector graphics and how they can actually respond to this, you need to make sure that you're offering that better user experience by offering up to have your website in dark mode to begin with. I don't prefer it when you have a button to do that, because you're actually overriding the preferences for the person who's already chosen that in the back end of the OS systems. So ideally what you want to do is put a dark theme on your website, and also allow, it's not allowing the OS system to do this, but PC users can go into the back end, and it used to be called high contrast themes because usually it was a lot of contrast, but they recently called it contrast themes, since a user can actually have a low contrast or any color that they want to choose for the foreground and the background. So
interesting.
In this kind of process, you wouldn't want to actually overwrite any of that on a website. You would want to make sure that the website's responding to the back end of the person's personal preferences first, and not trying to override that. So that's something to really consider before you even get into these scalable vector graphics that we're doing that are accessible, is that they need to respond to the OS systems and not be forced. So sometimes there's extensions for dark mode that force dark mode, and you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you're actually using the back end of your OS so that the natural websites will respond to you. I guess the biggest problem right now is that so many people are not even offering up the basic dark theme, which is a problem. It is a user experience problem, especially for low vision users who cannot stay on a bright website. Sometimes they actually put a dark screen over their monitor so that can't happen as they get into a site that doesn't offer a dark theme.
Well, for our listeners, so the Web Content Accessibility Guideline visual presentation, which is success criteria 1.4.8, is a AAA requirement. And I know that there's I don't want to say there's a contest, but when people are developing websites, they're trying to maximize the amount of accessibility features that a website can offer the end user. And I think that whenever someone can include a useful AAA requirement, they should. If that's an option for someone, why not? Even if it's only for 1 or 5, maybe it's only 5% of your audience or 1% of your audience, right? It's beneficial. And so 1.4.8 visual presentation says, for visual presentation of blocks of text, a mechanism is available to achieve the following. Foreground and background color can be selected by the user with no more than 80 characters or glyphs. Text is not justified. The line spacing, it talks about some different line spacing here, can be is to be at least a space and a half within paragraphs, and paragraph spacing is at least 1.5 times larger than the line spacing, and that text can be resized without assistive technology up to 200% without basically, deforming the website, right? And I think that there's been talk from people who've asked me the question, how big should I have my text for accessibility, right? What are the rules for font size and accessibility? Now, while this doesn't actually give you a font size, it does talk about line spacing and what those are. And as a AAA requirement, some people might think, oh, I don't really have to do that. But if you can, why not, right?
It's all about the user's experience. If you care about meeting legal requirements and that's it, you're not caring enough. Like, you need to be inclusive. You need to think about everyone else. Like, just limping in to be legal is not good enough. You have to think about these extra, things we can do. Adding a dark theme to your website is just a little bit of CSS. It's not hard.
Right.
Most of these larger companies that fail to have even just that basic are not thinking about it, aren't even paying attention to the fact that the user experience is absolutely imperative to be able to do these things, especially for people that have disabilities.
Right. I can think of one website that has a black background and orange text. And I'm like, I don't prefer that. It's not that it's hard for me to read. It's my brain wants to absorb everything. I don't have enough differentiation between the different areas because all the headings are orange. All the body text is orange. There's not a lot of it's very monotone. And I need, for my brain, I need that differentiation. And if I had the ability to change some of those things up, to make it more palatable for me, I think that could definitely be a benefit from a cognitive standpoint. But so going back to the SVGs, right? So one of the biggest problems is if I've got a logo and it's themed to my own logo colors, and then you put the site in, let's say, low contrast mode or high contrast mode, and now my logo is basically invisible because let's say my site was designed with a white background because I want my dark colors and my logo to pop, and all of a sudden the user wants dark mode and I've got navy blue or black as a primary color for my logo, my branding is now affected, right? And that's a benefit.
Well, actually, if they don't have a dark theme available, the site won't flip. So it will stay in the white mode or the light version of it. There are extensions that can force that, and that's when your graphics might disappear. So if you have a dark graphic, dark SVG, dark PNG that's transparent, those can literally disappear when you have somebody who's forcing a dark mode onto a website.
So how does the SVG help to overcome that?
Well, the accessible SVG is different than just a normal SVG. Many designers are used to putting an SVG extension type file into their website since they are so beautiful on any Retina device. And it responds to your dark mode. So the graphic that would be served up if you're on a dark themed enabled website would be the reversed out logo. You wouldn't even notice it change because it would just give you the dark theme website. Right. And all of the graphics would be beautifully made for that dark theme. In your branding style guide, a lot of times people will give you a white background on your logo or transparent for a white background, but they also give you on a dark background a reversed out logo in your branding style guide.
Right. Well, the tech geek in me is really, really curious. So I'm really curious, like when you talk about like using the operating system to force contrast mode.
Yes.
Is the operating system looking for a media query of a specific name in your website? Like, is that how that works?
Well, the specific thing is, yes, it will respond. When you're in force colors, it will force everything into force colors. Every single website, every single program on your computer, your Mac, your mail program, whatever it is, everything is forced into those colors. So it's a really dominant thing. When you have a website that has that, a lot of times the graphics don't shift because they're not responding to that media query, that they are in that type of force colors thing. But these graphics will actually see that and change over to have that reflected color so that they can actually see your brand or see your infographics. And that's a huge thing for low vision users because a lot of times it might be, some type of low contrast pixelated logo. And if they try to blow it up, it also becomes super pixelated, hard to read. And these graphics are actually be in the color that they've chosen that they can actually perceive. A lot of times low vision users get like 2 or 3 inches from a monitor, and they need these really bright garish colors to see. So it's actually quite a crucial thing to allow your graphics to flip into that to match what they're looking for.
Hey, Chad, this seems to me a lot like an Illustrator. There's the replace colors feature, right? I mean, I don't use it very often. Back when I was doing logo design way back when, and we had to go through color iterations of a logo for a client, I would be very careful to design with that replace colors or feature, so that when the client was either in a conference call or I was sitting there with my laptop, this was days before Zoom and Teams and all of that, I could just be like, yeah, sure, let's drag this around. And I'd drag sliders, or I'd replace colors. And all of a sudden it would morph into these different iterations of their logo. And it was like magic, right? And, clients really dug that. And it made my job a lot easier because I could just say, okay, I'm going to drag the slider. Tell me when to stop. And they'd be like, there, that's it.
Save.
Paycheck, please. Yep. Invoice. Right. Well, it sounds like there's some really good stuff here. I know my dealings with high contrast mode. I was teaching someone from Nigeria, actually, how to do some accessibility work inside PowerPoint. And the first thing he asked me was, hey, can you put your windows into high contrast mode? And honestly, it was the first time I had ever put my computer into high contrast mode. And talk about a jarring thing when you're not used to it. Everything's black, Chad. The entire screens are all black, and in every program. And then you have fuchsia and cyan and yellow and all these really I just think 80s neon colors on a black background. And it was really interesting. And I noticed in the PowerPoint, a lot of the graphics did disappear with that dark background because they were all transparent, just transparent PNGs or just art that had been made in the program that wasn't responding to that contrast mode. So having your ability, Heather, to be able to predict or to accommodate whatever that user is going to pick as their good user experience embedded into this graphic, I think that's such a great benefit.
It absolutely is. The other thing is that if a brand really doesn't want to accommodate this particular setting, they can prevent that and keep the logo looking like itself. We just highly encourage it because it is a smaller percentage of the users, and they would actually a lot of times, be in a low vision situation. They could actually perceive your stuff, which is again about allowing that user to choose that, which again is the AAA compliancy for 1.4.8. But it is actually something that allows a lot of people to actually see what's going on in your website. So we highly encourage all brands to start with their logo and to allow that media query to happen, since it's so important as well.
It also shows that a brand cares about accessibility, that you're thinking about those types of things.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the other big thing is that we're testing across all major browsers, but we're really focusing on the screen reader experience and making sure that they hear a very thoughtful contextual description as well. And there's a lot of cool things that SVGs can do that are a little bit different than just an alt text. So because we have the ability to actually use what we call selectable, or sometimes Illustrator will call it live text, where it's actually like text, we can actually build that into, say, an infographic. And that text can actually be selectable or keyboard navigable within the actual graphic, which is something I had never seen before when we started getting into this.
That's probably like the first time I've heard that Illustrator, anything you output from Illustrator can be accessible. Because like in DAX in my world, in the world of PDF, when you place an Illustrator file in InDesign and you export it, it's just a figure, right? There's really nothing else there. But, in your case, you're saying exporting to SVG, you're saying that text from Illustrator can remain live.
Yes, exactly. There's a bunch of little things about it that you need to do, obviously, and to choose the right font types. I think open type fonts work better than any type of TTF.
Of course.
There's little type of things like that for screeners, similar to PDFs, that you need to be in the same format. But yeah, you can actually export that layer as actual text, and it comes into the XML as text. The other thing we can do is have unlimited characters. Now, that's something that's actually quite different than alt text, where sometimes people want that really brief thing. We're working on right now. We haven't actually figured it out yet, but we know it's possible, is that we're going to be able to allow a screen reader user to have a choice of a very brief alternative text, or they can actually listen to a fairly longer, extended kind of description. And that's going to be a choice within the graphic itself, served up to the screen.
That would be great. I that would be a huge benefit. Talking about alt text inside a SVG, it's really it allows. It's almost like the metadata inside a JPEG or a PNG, where you can right click and go into, or you can set the metadata for the title or the description to include that alt text. But currently, as far as I know, InDesign is the only program that can actually suck that out and use that as a piece of information, right? Because if you dump in a PNG or a JPEG into a website that may have, a title or description metadata, that doesn't automatically get dumped into the alt text, right?
Not automatically. There's two things that I've learned recently, is that Google will index all that metadata and start, putting that information into advanced search. The other thing that's going to happen is the company named Scribely has actually been working with the IPTC to have alt text adopted into their standardization, both a long and a shorter description. And one of the things that she was able to do is work with, I believe, WordPress to actually, when they upload any photograph, to automatically suck out the alt text, which is a fantastic accessibility feature. So I know that she's been working hard to make sure that something like that would happen in a content management system that would see it embedded in the metadata and pull it out for everybody to see.
Right. And that's Caroline DeRozier. We actually met at Access U and we talked about that. Right. Yeah, absolutely. And if you ever are in need of trying to develop alt text, you have a lot of alt text that you need to get done. Scribely actually is scribelytribe.com, and you can actually hire their company to create the alt text for you. But if you're looking to create your own alt text, we've got a webinar coming up just this Thursday that is the secrets of writing effective alt text. Now, I don't have all of Caroline's secrets, but I can tell you that what we're going to teach people in this webinar, it's a 3-hour webinar, so it's definitely not just a quick thing, but we're going to teach people how to understand what it is that you're trying to get across, how to be able to write that in a formulaic way that lets you basically apply a formula to any graphic that will give you a very clear answer to the question, how do I write alt text for this whatever, figure, chart, graph, infographic, whatever, right? So Chad, you and I, I'll be presenting that, but I'm really excited about that. We've got a couple handouts for that, and you can go over to accessibilityunravel.com and look at our open enrollment online events. Matter of fact, there's even a big image on the homepage there where you can go sign up for that. So for those people who are listening, and you're looking for guidance on how to write some alt text, and you want to do it yourself, head on over to our website and sign up for that. There is still room, and we've got a $75 discount right now for people who sign up. And we'd love to have you. So,
yeah, I mean, alt text is one of those topics that on paper seems like it's a very simple thing. But I can't tell you how many customers have been reaching out to me asking for guidance on how to write good alternate text, because they're often presented with a challenge. They're like, well, what am I supposed to do? And, one of the things you're going to talk about, Dax, is you have to ask yourself, what is the intent?
Right.
Right. Because based on the answer to that question, you could have different alternate text for the same image.
Totally.
Right. Because it all depends on what the intent is. What message are you trying to convey, in the context of that image?
Well, and that's why when people ask you that question, you say, well, what are you trying to get across? They're like, I don't know. Well, then of course you can't write the alt text for that. If you don't know what it is that you're trying to get across, then I get it.
Dax, you and I, as the people teaching this, we're like, well, we definitely don't know, right? Like you and I definitely don't know the answer to that. Only you, as the document author, the person responsible for this project, can effectively answer that question.
Well, I would say, Heather, that it's similar to when someone said, if someone were to tell you, well, what colors look good for my logo? What do you think? And like, yeah, I could give you 100 different combinations and they all would be right. So it's not about me, it's about what you want, right? And kind of that whole theory.
Yeah, with alt text, it's all about contextual descriptions and knowing what the author is intending, and therefore really understanding what's really important to talk about within the alternative text and making sure that it actually represents why you put it in there. And it's really important to also think about the emotional effects that of an image can have, and how do we kind of give an equivalent experience. If it's something about the brand or some type of emotional response, that's actually something also to kind of figure out how to write about, which is super tricky.
So my forte is accessible infographics, making, advanced experiences when you're dealing with graphic art and for accessibility. And one of the things that I teach is doing your work in Illustrator, keeping it live text so that you can bring it into the PDF and then access that live text and actually tag it as text. But what you're saying is that if you were to export that as an SVG, it skips that whole step, because now, and this is basically web-based. We're not talking about inside a PDF, but in a website, you could have that same experience automatically almost. I mean, if you've done it correctly, so that what I have the ability to do inside a PDF manually, you can do automatically in an SVG embedded into a web page. That's great.
It's basically, SVGs are basically a document type. So it's like putting a website inside the website. In fact, they're so powerful that they can actually call in audio files. They can call in other rasterized images if you want. They can clip, they can mask, they can add filters, and they can be super interactive. One of the examples I give is you could design an SVG to be like a sign-up box, right? Where you normally be typing in your name and there's a submit button. So you type in your name, you hit the submit button, and then the whole thing turns into a rocket ship and flies away, right? So there's this like amazing little micro animations that you can do. A lot of times SVGs are also for like loading graphics, and we can also do things to make them super compliant. So of course, if you did any SVG animation, you would want to make sure that they are either less than 5 seconds to be WCAG compliant, or you allow the user to actually stop and play the graphic if it's animating. And then also it would have the media query to have that prefers reduced motion media query, which would be listening to the preferences in the OS system saying, I don't want animation. And it's up to the engineers to, if they do have that checked off, what actually happens to the graphics. So there's all kinds of ways you can slow it down, or you can only have it repeat once, or you actually kill it altogether, depending on what the company wants to do with that like actual request to stop or to reduce the animation.
So Heather, I'm curious, like, is there a significant demand for this technology? I mean, are you finding clients that are reaching out to you to be able to implement this within their organizations?
What I've found is every single time that I share this information, I get a wow, amazing. I didn't know it could do this. Like, this is an incredible discovery. And the only way I found it was that I stumbled into a course that I didn't even know existed. And it was one of these things where I was like, I think I should bring this to the world, because I had never seen it. And I thought I was a graphics expert and I knew everything. And then I discovered all this extra stuff. And I was like, oh, geez, I didn't know anything about making accessible graphics. And therefore, when I've talked to other peoples and tech companies and other major companies, accessibility firms, they've never even heard of this technology. And in fact, every single time I've reached out on LinkedIn or on Twitter, I get a great response. People are very excited to share it and to talk about it. And my goal is to literally change the world one graphic at a time. And I'm going to bring this to national level chapters and to make sure that we teach at conferences and give away a bunch of information. I think I'm one of the first marketing people and graphic designers that saw the potential of this. And I made a company to do this because I saw that in the accessibility field, there's such a misconception that everything has to be boring and ugly to be accessible.
Right. And we hear that all the time.
Yeah, all the time. And I, as a UI UX person who became disabled and saw this technology, I was like, oh, hell no. Everything can be well branded and beautiful.
Yep.
You just need to know what the hell you're doing. And this is something that is imperative for all of us to learn, because this technology will advance us so far and become more inclusive and really create social change that it's absolutely imperative that everyone knows about it.
Well, and you are, so in that vein, to know about it, they can reach out to you on Twitter, right? At Heather S. Neff, Neff. or how else can they get a hold of you?
Well, the main company, Equivalent Design, can be found on Twitter as well at Equivalent UX, and that's a capital E and capital UX. And again, that's Equivalent UX. And then also our website is www.equivalent.design. And that's something that
Oh, okay.
it has a great explainer video. We put our branding into it. All of our branding has to do with basically disabled animals. We have a guide dog as our mascot. And we have this whole explainer video showing what a pixel is, what a vector is, and walking through the process so that anyone, especially upper management and people who are not designers, can actually understand what we're trying to do. My little sister
Sure.
watched it. She said, I had no idea what you did, but now I'm sold. Like, this is great, right? So
Yeah.
once you understand the potential, you see how inclusive these are. We also have demos on our website that shows you the same logo truncating onto smaller and smaller breakpoints on there, and we show the code pen with a code equaling the graphic, and you can actually
Yep.
see it change into dark mode. You see it change into force colors. You can see it still animating in force colors, and you can see us showing the selectable, editable, keyboard navigable text within an infographic on our homepage. So again, that's www.equivalent.design.
Awesome. Well, we are so happy to have had you on today. We, definitely, I think this is one of those topics where you don't know what you don't know. And once you hear about it and hear what's possible, it opens up so many doors. Now, a lot of our clients are all in the PDF business, but I think accessibility obviously expands far from there, and that we have websites and mobile apps and all of the different, presentations of digital media, and SVGs open that door up to create a richer experience for the end user, which is really what it's all about. It's giving that digital equity to everyone, regardless of the way they interpret information. And I think that is so important. And for companies out there who, here's my pitch to companies who might be listening. This may not solve a bunch of problems for you. This technology isn't, oh my gosh, this is the solution we were looking for. What this technology is a marker to say, hey, we care about presenting as much accessibility as possible, about reaching the largest audience as possible, that we are looking at and being considerate of people with disabilities. And this is Disability Pride Month, right? And last month was Pride Month, and for people who have in the LGBTQ plus community. And I think that's great. And I think a lot of people were changing logos and making different big presentations. This month is Disability Pride Month, and it is, I'm not sure I'm seeing the same enthusiasm, and we see all of these DEI, that is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I think sometimes peoples with disability get marginalized.
Ignored. Yeah, absolutely.
And so I would just say that if you are looking for a way to say, hey, we're a company that cares, we really are investing in technology that reaches the widest audience, this is a technology you should be interested in.
And as a marketing professional, it's also about the bottom line. And unfortunately, major corporations need to see some type of return on investment.
Right.
The ideal situation, as you guys know, is if you make something accessible, it makes it better for everybody, but it also can open up your market share. So to make these graphics search engine friendly, to load your site faster, to put the keywords in there, to actually make these things, more information and visibility to people, you also get the brand of loyalty, which is great. So if I find something that's super accessible, I am then a brand advocate, right? So as the disability community is 1.5 billion people, that's a lot of revenue that you could be generating by, making sure they feel as accepted as possible. And one of the reasons why I call our company Equivalent is in the accessibility world, you're always hearing make an equivalent experience, right?
Right.
To make sure you're thinking about all different types of disabilities. And we're designing for things like ADHD and dyslexia and all that kind of cognitive issues, as well as things like colorblind and blind users. So everything we design in Illustrator is actually going through every single thing we could do, as well as designing print work, because we're graphic designers. So we're actually doing everything we can possibly think of, including InDesign templates from scratch. So we are actually really focused on all kinds of graphics, and that's what we're doing. But our tagline is equity through graphics, and we really want to bring that equity into everything we do. But yeah, it's actually really important for people to realize disability inclusion is part of that inclusion thing on your DEI statement.
Exactly. Awesome. Chad?
Yeah. Dax, you and I were talking to somebody the other day who had said their counterpart, like their coworker, I think it might have even been her boss. He said he absolutely hated PDF files, that they're not accessible, that they can't be made accessible. And, it's hard when you hear that, and that comes from an area of bad experience.
Right.
And so to your point, I have to believe that, the factors that companies consider, right? Like when they're, making their website accessible, it has to include listen, I mean, if I'm somebody who benefits from an accessible website, you've got to believe that if they hit a website that is friendly and that accommodates them, that they're going to come back and they're going to become an advocate for, that technology. So, I have to believe that is going to be part of the factors that a company will use to consider, whether to implement this type of technology.
I find it's funny because my wife has celiac disease. And so everything has to be gluten-free. And so we go to restaurants. There are specific restaurants we go to because of, there's one called Lazy Dog out here. And if I know they're not listening to us, but Lazy Dog used to have the most amazing gluten-free carrot cake. It is outstanding. And after COVID or during COVID, whatever, they stopped serving it because they just weren't getting enough people out. Right. And so, but we didn't, honestly, I don't really care for the food. There's nothing special about, well, maybe the maple bacon is probably special. But
they're not listening.
But I mean, the food is pretty normal. There's other options we could go to, but because they serve this gluten-free option, we decide to go there. And there are other restaurants that we go to specifically because they offer gluten-free options. And I think that it's a loyalty thing. And if I have an issue that you're gonna cater to, I'm gonna come to you. If it's more expensive, I don't care. If it's a better experience for me and my wife gets to eat the food she wants to eat and I get to enjoy myself and we get to enjoy that experience, I'm absolutely going to pay extra for that, or I'm absolutely going to be loyal to that experience because it shows that you care. And it gives me the freedom to know that I can have a great experience with my wife while I'm out. And I think accessibility is that same kind of way. It may not directly impact in a specific instance your bottom line, but the overall impact is I'm going to be brand loyal. I'm going to know that you care and that you're considerate about me as a feeling. And I'm going to tell somebody else, hey, did you know, XYZ? And that's going to get passed on, and your brand is going to grow. So, it is more than, there's an added benefit, like you said, to the bottom line.
I have a little story. I've been actually working and talking with a man named Doug Sheppers, and I call him the grandfather of SVGs.
Doug is great. I watched one of his videos the other day on cognitive the cognitive reasoning behind infographics. Oh my gosh, Doug is amazing.
Yeah, so he's been doing this, and he is the one who fought for 4 years to make Firefox, Chrome, Safari, and at the time, Internet Explorer adopt the SVG. He fought for 4 years because he could see how important this technology was. And so he's one of the reasons why it was adopted a bunch of years ago. And honestly, huge props to him because he's still doing low vision user software that's absolutely amazing. He's an expert in SVGs and does a lot of data visualization stuff, which is a totally harder and more complex topic than just making iconography for an infographic.
Sure.
Chad, I actually sent you a link to one of his videos in Teams. I'm scrolling through Teams now to try to find it. It was one of the ones that I had looked at. I just contributed to a paper on infographics for the Urban Institute. And part of my research was researching Doug's material. And
interesting.
It was great. We're talking about cognitive load and how we create a graphic in the what affects how quickly we interpret that information from a visual standpoint. So
Wow.
really
Yeah,
great stuff.
I talk about doing iconography for wayfinding and maps and so forth. And the example I love to give is our brains calculate an icon way faster than some of the text. So an example is if you're running through an airport in any country around the world and you see the men and women signs that are icons, you know exactly that's a restroom. But can you try to imagine trying to translate the word restrooms into every language and our brains trying to figure that out when we're running through an airport? It ain't going to happen. So these iconography can be very good, but they have to match universal icons. You just can't make up your own and expect someone to understand it. So that's a big key about that as well.
Well, a great example of that is IKEA. All of IKEA's instructions to put their products together have no text. And that alleviates them from having to translate into all of those different languages. All of their instructions are just figures, step 1, right? Do this. Step 2, do this, and whenever I have to, trust me, I've put together my fair share of IKEA furniture in my life. And I could tell you, I mean, they do a very good job, right? It's typically, very simple.
However, if you're blind.
Very, very good point. Very good point.
Right before COVID, I was at CSUN in LA. And this is right when COVID was kind of announced as a go home. Matter of fact, the last day of CSUN, they cut the day off and said, go, everybody leave. We're done.
Oh, that's right.
I was there the day before that talking to someone from IKEA, and she and I were strategizing about how we should come up with a way to tactile label the different pieces for IKEA furniture to allow a blind person or a person with low vision to be able to assemble the furniture, having like a braille system or a dot matching system or raised lettering that's like A to A, B to B. And then, it was a great, the conversation didn't go anywhere past that, but we thought, how awesome would it be for IKEA to come out with 3 or 4 different pieces of furniture that a blind person could assemble on their own?
Or order it online pre-assembled would be nice too. But
yeah, that's true. But getting delivery is also an issue, right? Getting someone to get it in the house, and when you're dealing with a sofa. But anyway, it has been so great having you on the program. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us.
Well, Heather, thank you again so much for joining us and being a guest on our podcast. It was great having you, and I learned a ton. So I really, really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me on today. I was honored to be here.
Absolutely. Well, listen, guys, once again, we want to thank the North Idaho College and the upcoming Accessibility Camp Coeur d'Alene, which is on August 3rd and 4th in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. More information on the Alley Camp Symposium can be found at nic.edu/A11Y camp. And just remember, if you're looking for in-person or online training or struggling to establish an accessibility program within your organization, head over to accessibilityunraveled.com. My name is Chad Chilius.
And my name is Dax Castro, where each week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.